We are back for another Everything Travel Nursing. Today, let's talk about contracts. What is a travel nursing contract? Your travel nursing contract is exactly what it sounds like. It's a contract. It's also the main protection for you. It is the contract between you, the facility, and the company that you work for, the time frame in which you will be working, what facility you will be working for, the amount that you will be paid, as well as the stipulations within your contract as an employee of the agency that you work for. It is imperative that you as a traveler treat this as your business, and your contract is a form of protection for yourself. So within that, let's deep dive into the pieces of your contract, things to look out for, things that you really need to think about having in order to cover yourself, but also to have a good quality of life outside of work. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit more. But first, your contract is a form of protection. You need to read every single word within that contract. If you have any questions, that conversation is directly with your recruiter. It is not with the facility. Things for my own contract that are a must-have for me. One of the main things to protect yourself financially is to have guaranteed hours within your contract. And if your company doesn't do this already, make sure that you ask for it. Travelers are typically there to help a facility. You are a visitor, and within that, you also have to be mindful that you need your, let's just say, 40-hour work week to meet your financial needs. So if you have guaranteed hours within your contract, the facility and your company have to uphold that. So you will not be the first one that is sent home if there's not enough volume, or if there are not enough patients to accommodate the staffing that they had planned for that day. Guaranteed hours, in my opinion, are an absolute must and a big part of your contract. The other things that are covered in your contract include your base pay, include overtime rate, maybe you have a double time for so many hours worked. It also includes your requested time off. So if you need a certain set amount of dates, you have to request those, because if they are not within your contract, the facility does not have to give you those dates off. I even go so far as to, if I have a certain weekend off, I will ask for no call that Friday, no work Saturday, Sunday, and maybe no call Monday, because I don't want to get slammed. It all varies. But within that, you also have to have a certain amount of traveler etiquette. You are there to help the facility. So if it is during the holiday, I try to be a little flexible, where maybe I make myself more available for Thanksgiving, or maybe I have a trip planned at the first of the year, so I'm a little more accommodating around Christmas. I personally like to operate under those premises. However, I have worked with travelers that are like, F that, I'm taking all the holidays off, and they put that in their contract. So the other part of that is to know that if you request an insane amount of time off, maybe like 4 weeks in the middle of a contract, the facility also has the right to deny those. And so then that puts you in the position of, do you really want that time off, and are you going to say no to that contract because the facility isn't willing to accommodate that? It's a fine line. So when you are travel nursing, best etiquette and just being a good human in a way is, in my personal opinion, you're a traveler, you're there to help. You're not there to be used and abused and treated poorly, but you're there to help. And so it's good to make yourself a little more understanding and available to the facility needs. So there are things in life though that it's like you need that time off, and that within your own work-life balance is important to take that time. On the other side of guaranteed hours, some companies and some facilities will have a certain amount of cancellations written into the contract. For example, a contract might say the facility can cancel you up to 3 occurrences, meaning that they can send you home for partial time, or they can send you home for the day or cancel you for the day, only up to 3 times within that contract. So within a 13-week period, typically assignments are that long, that's not terrible. And depending on where you work and the need, sometimes you're going to have more overtime than what you care to have, and a cancellation might be something you're like, well, yeah, I'll take the day. So it really is a give and take, especially within cath lab. Sometimes it's feast or famine, and sometimes you have 80 hours on a pay period, or you have your just standard, or it varies, more so in cath lab. Boy, the light has changed, hasn't it? There's a lot of clouds, wow. Anyway, so within your contract, it's important to note, is your base pay correct? Is your overtime? If you're in cath lab or you take call, is your on-call pay rate correct? What is your callback time? So if you do work in cath lab, a 2-hour callback time is basically when your pager goes off and you're running into the hospital and it might be a false alarm. If they cancel you, you automatically get paid for those 2 hours. There's a lot of different things within your own personal field that might be applicable. If you work ICU and you are taking call for the night, and you need to make sure that if you are in a status of on call, you're being paid to have your life put on hold. Basically, you are technically working, because if you are on call, can you go out and have a good time? Do you have to stay available to the hospital? Yes. So no going out, no good times. It's just you are still currently in a work status. It's just you are not at work. Another thing that I have covered within my contract is the floating portion. So if you're new to nursing, maybe you don't quite understand what does it mean to be floated. If you worked in an ICU or a facility that had closed units, this might be a whole new thing for you. Some facilities will pull staff from different units. So for example, you might be working ICU, but you were pulled to med-surg for the night or for the day. How different are those two areas? Drastically. They are both a different type of hard in the way of nursing. Med-surg nurses have a completely different skill set and kind of mentality than ICU nurses. The same thing as you wouldn't float a med-surg nurse to ICU and vice versa. However facilities do it. Is it the best thing for the patient? In my opinion, no, because you need a nurse that is very skilled in that area. However, it happens. And so for me specifically working in cath lab, sometimes they'll want to float you to interventional radiology. Now, is that within my skill set? Yes, but do I really want to be doing that if I'm working cath lab? I choose to be a little bit more finicky with that, just because I love cath lab, and I will work interventional radiology, but it's not my priority per se. Sometimes they'll want to float you to a pre-post unit. Do I work pre-post? Have I before? Yeah, in a small scope, but every pre-post unit is different, and that in itself you can be put in a situation to where you are working in a condition where you don't have the skill set. Now, you fill out skills checklist, and these determine that you are safe to practice within your scope or your department. And some companies will have, this is something that I've been put in this position, so I kind of put this out there. If you have not filled out a skill set for, let's say you're working ICU and they want to float you to the emergency department, contact your company. Sometimes that company, in order to cover themselves for liability, they don't allow that, because it is considered a liability. You are working out of your scope of your skill set. And so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as like a question that you can ask whenever you're put in those positions. They're not comfortable positions. I've talked a little bit about my assignment in Tampa in some previous videos, but a really unique thing to that assignment, just to kind of pull this all full circle, is I had guaranteed hours. The hospital had overstaffed their unit. Therefore, we had 3 or 4 travel nurses kind of hanging out on the clock, and the powers that be didn't really care to have that many people just hanging out, but we all had guaranteed hours. So what they did was send us home with pay. So a large portion of that contract, and this is a very unique situation, I spent gallivanting around the beach while I still got paid for my 40 hours of work. Does that happen typically everywhere? No, that was a very interesting circumstance. What had happened before they decided to send, 2 nurses home for the day is they tried to float us to the ER. Now, I have never worked ER. I go down to the ER, I pick up my patients, I run them to cath lab and go from there, and then they're transferred to ICU. I was put in a position where I had to push back against the facility in a very polite way. You're always professional, you're always polite, but I had to kind of assert that this is not within my skill set. I'm not entirely comfortable. They didn't really care for that, but my company advocated for me. They said, look, we can't do this because of liability. This is the skill set, this is what they're there for, and floating is not within her contract. And that was something that I could also say to them, is like, I have a no float within this contract, or if I am comfortable with a facility, maybe I've been there, or I'm comfortable knowing what procedures they do in interventional radiology, I'll say, yeah, sure, okay. For this contract, I'll float there because it's within my scope and I'm comfortable with that. However, if you just choose you don't want to do that, or you aren't comfortable, it's something that you can have put in your contract. So guaranteed hours and floating are important, along with all the pieces of your pay. Very, very important. Your contract is the form of protection for you for that time that you are working at that facility, and for the communication and relationship that you have with the company you are working for. The contract is from your staffing agency, your company, and it is in connection with the facility. Does that make sense? All right, so that is really, you have read your contract, you have made sure it has all the pieces that you need within that. It's going to include your base pay, your travel, your time off, your housing stipend, as well as your per diems. And if you guys are interested in a pay breakdown of what to expect and how companies structure that, comment down below. That is not a video that I have planned to go into much depth or detail about that. Those are just portions that you need to be aware of, and they're pretty straightforward when you're communicating with companies. That is a very brief rundown to contract ins and outs. Once you sign that contract, I basically say I am signed, sealed, delivered. I'm going to that location, and now I can start putting the pieces together in order to get there. And that'll be what we discuss in the next videos. I hope that helps.